The room crackled with tension. The air was thick with anticipation, as if everyone present knew that something monumental was about to unfold. Reporters exchanged nervous glances, their pens poised, ready to capture every word, every gesture. The atmosphere was electric, charged with the kind of energy that precedes a storm. Cameras flashed, capturing every grimace, every bead of sweat on the president's brow. The relentless clicking of shutters was a constant reminder that every moment was being documented, every expression scrutinized. The president stood at the podium, his face a canvas of conflicting emotions, anger, frustration, and a steely resolve. Donald Trump, his face a mask of barely contained fury, slammed his fist on the podium. The sound echoed through the room, a sharp punctuation to his mounting rage. His eyes blazed with intensity, and his voice, when he spoke, was a thunderous roar that demanded attention. "They think they can outsmart us!" he roared, his voice dripping with disdain. The words hung in the air, heavy with accusation. He scanned the room, his gaze piercing through the crowd, as if daring anyone to challenge him. The tension was palpable, a living, breathing entity that seemed to grow with every passing second. "They think they can take advantage of America." His words were a rallying cry, a call to arms against perceived injustices. The audience was silent, hanging on his every word, the weight of his accusations sinking in. This was not just a speech, it was a declaration of war. "Well, I've got news for them, those days are over." His voice rose to a crescendo, each word delivered with the force of a hammer blow. The room seemed to vibrate with the intensity of his proclamation. This was a turning point, a moment that would be remembered long after the cameras stopped rolling. This was not just another rambling diatribe, this was different, this was personal. The president's demeanor, his tone, everything about him conveyed a sense of urgency and determination. He was a man on a mission, and nothing was going to stand in his way. Trump had been triggered, and the target of his ire was none other than India, a country he once called a great friend of the United States. The betrayal he felt was evident in every word, every gesture. This was a personal affront, and he was not going to let it go unanswered. The reason? A bold and unexpected $45 billion economic maneuver that had blindsided the White House and sent shockwaves through the global financial system. The ramifications of this move were still unfolding, but one thing was clear: it had struck a nerve. Trump, never one to back down from a fight, was spoiling for a trade war. His stance was clear, his resolve unshakable. He was ready to take on anyone who dared to challenge America's supremacy, and he was willing to go to any lengths to protect the nation's interests. But this time, the stakes were higher than ever before. The world watched with bated breath, aware that the outcome of this confrontation could reshape the global economic landscape. This was more than just a political skirmish. It was a battle for the future. India, for its part, had seemingly had enough. The nation, with its rich history and burgeoning population, was ready to take a stand. For decades, India had been a key player in the global market, yet often found itself at the mercy of larger, more dominant economies. The time had come for a change. After years of playing by the rules of a global trading system that often seemed rigged against developing economies, India decided to rewrite the playbook. The global trading system, with its complex web of tariffs, trade agreements, and economic policies, had long favored the established powers. But India, with its vast resources and innovative spirit, saw an opportunity to turn the tide. The sleeping giant was finally flexing its muscles. This wasn't just a fleeting moment of bravado, it was a well-thought-out strategy. The nation was ready to harness its potential, leveraging its strengths in technology, manufacturing, and agriculture to carve out a new path. The rising sun over the Indian landscape symbolized a new dawn, a fresh start for a country ready to assert its dominance. The $45 billion move, a carefully calculated cocktail of tariffs, subsidies, and strategic investments, was designed to bolster domestic industries, reduce reliance on American imports, and send a clear message to the world. India was ready to compete on its own terms. This financial maneuver was not just about money, it was about reshaping the economic landscape, creating jobs, and fostering innovation within the country. It was designed to bolster domestic industries, reduce reliance on American imports, and send a clear message to the world. India was no longer content to be a pawn in someone else's game. The focus was on self-reliance, empowering local businesses, and ensuring that the fruits of economic growth were enjoyed by its own citizens. From the bustling factories to the serene farmlands, every sector was set to benefit from this bold move. India was no longer content to be a pawn in someone else's game. The nation was ready to be a kingmaker, influencing global policies and decisions. The Indian Parliament, with its historic significance, stood as a testament to the country's democratic values and its commitment to progress. The celebrations across the nation reflected a collective sense of pride and optimism. This was not about petty retaliation. It was about asserting India's sovereignty and economic independence. The diplomatic meetings and protests were a clear indication that India was ready to engage with the world on its own terms. The juxtaposition of the Indian and American flags symbolized a new era of negotiations, where India would no longer be a silent participant, but an active and influential player. This was about India claiming its rightful place on the world stage. The speeches by the Indian Prime Minister echoed the sentiments of millions, emphasizing the nation's resolve to be a global leader. The celebratory crowds were a testament to the collective will of the people, united in their vision for a prosperous and powerful India. And the U.S. economy, long accustomed to calling the shots, was about to feel the heat. The ripples of India's bold move were felt across the globe, with Wall Street showing signs of concern. The decline in the stock market and the economic protests in the U.S. were clear indicators that the world was taking notice. India's $45 billion bombshell was not just a financial decision, it was a statement of intent, a declaration that the future belonged to those who dared to dream big. The relationship between the U.S. and India, particularly on the economic front, had always been a complicated dance. Over the decades, both nations have seen their fair share of ups and downs, with moments of cooperation often shadowed by periods of tension. The economic ties between these two giants have been marked by a series of negotiations, agreements, and disputes, each leaving its own mark on the bilateral relationship. Periods of booming trade and investment were often punctuated by bouts of friction and mistrust. These fluctuations were driven by a myriad of factors, including political changes, economic policies, and global market dynamics. The mutual benefits of trade were undeniable, yet the path was rarely smooth. Trump, with his America First rhetoric and penchant for unilateral action, had only exacerbated these tensions. His administration's approach to international trade was marked by a series of aggressive moves aimed at protecting American interests, often at the expense of long-standing allies and partners. Tariffs were slapped on Indian steel and aluminum. These measures were justified by the U.S. on grounds of national security and economic fairness, but they were perceived in India as protectionist and unfair. The imposition of these tariffs sent shockwaves through the Indian manufacturing sector, which had been a significant supplier of these materials to the U.S. India retaliated with levies on American agricultural products. This move was aimed at protecting its own agricultural sector and sending a clear message to Washington. The impact was felt by American farmers, who had come to rely on the Indian market for their exports. The trade deficit, a perennial thorn in the side of U.S.-India relations, continued to balloon. Despite efforts to address this imbalance through various trade deals and negotiations, the gap persisted, fueling further discontent on both sides. The $45 billion move then was not so much a sudden rupture as it was the culmination of years of simmering resentment. This significant shift in trade policy was a reflection of the deep-seated issues that had been brewing for years, highlighting the complexities and challenges of maintaining a balanced and mutually beneficial economic relationship between two of the world's largest democracies. The reaction from the U.S. financial markets was swift and brutal. The Dow Jones plummeted, shedding hundreds of points in a matter of hours. The S&P 500 followed suit, dragged down by fears of a full-blown trade war between the world's two largest democracies. Analysts, caught off guard by the audacity and scale of India's move, scrambled to make sense of the chaos. Whispers of recession, once confined to the fringes of economic discourse, were suddenly on everyone's lips. The American consumer, long the engine of global growth, braced for impact. Section 5: Global Leaders Sound the Alarm. From Beijing to Brussels, world leaders watched with a mixture of concern and apprehension. The prospect of a trade war between the United States and India, two economic powerhouses with a combined GDP of over $40 trillion, was a deeply unsettling development. Emergency meetings were convened, frantic phone calls were made. The consensus was clear: This was a crisis in the making, one that threatened to unravel the fragile fabric of the global trading system. But could anything be done to avert disaster? Section 6. India's Economic Evolution. To understand the significance of India's $45 billion gamble, one must delve into the country's remarkable economic journey. Once dismissed as a land of poverty and bureaucracy, India had undergone a dramatic transformation in recent decades. Economic liberalization, coupled with a surge in foreign investment, had unleashed a wave of entrepreneurial energy. The IT sector boomed, propelling India into the ranks of global tech giants. Manufacturing too was on the rise, fueled by a young and increasingly skilled workforce. India, it seemed, was finally living up to its potential. Section 7. The Ghost of Protectionism. But India's economic miracle was not without its challenges. Poverty remained endemic, and income inequality was on the rise. The ghosts of protectionism, long thought to be vanquished, were staging a comeback. The $45 billion move, while presented as a bold assertion of economic sovereignty, could also be seen as a sign of inward-looking tendencies. Was India, once a champion of free trade, now turning its back on the very principles that had underpinned its rise? The answer, like so much else in this unfolding drama, remained frustratingly elusive. Section 8. A Future on the Brink. As the dust settled on Trump's explosive press conference, the world held its breath. Would cooler heads prevail, or was this the opening salvo in a trade war that nobody could win? The stakes could not have been higher. At risk was not just the economic well-being of billions of people, but the very future of globalization itself. The coming days and weeks would be crucial, a delicate dance on the edge of a precipice. One misstep, one miscalculation could send the world tumbling into the abyss. Section 9. The world holds its breath. In the high-stakes game of international geopolitics, there are rarely easy answers. The $45 billion question, what happens next, hung heavy in the air. Would Trump, true to form, double down on his bluster and escalate the confrontation? Or would India, emboldened by its newfound economic might, refuse to back down? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain, the world was watching, and the outcome of this clash of titans would have profound consequences for generations to come.